And let's speak now to Dr. Gillies O'Bryan-Tear from the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine, a professional association of medics who work in the pharmaceutical industry and are involved in clinical trials worldwide. It's great to have you with us today to talk about this. And let's begin with safety, because clearly nothing is going to happen until the regulators have looked at the safety data of the trials conducted by Pfizer and BioNTech. And I've got to ask you, yesterday, do you think that this announcement would have gone ahead if there had been any serious safety concerns about these trials?
Well, that's a tough one. I think with the efficacy data being as good as they were, I think they would have announced yes. Remember, a couple of the vaccine programs have had safety announcements already, and a couple of them were halted temporarily, and that hasn't happened to this trial. The other comment I'd make is that the data committee who looked at these data are an independent committee, independent of Pfizer and BioNTech, and they said that there were no safety signals that they'd seen. But as a reminder, the FDA has asked for 2 months of data on all the patients following their second dose of vaccine before any submission of this data is made to them. And that will be available, according to Pfizer, at the end of the month.
Is that an industry standard? Do you need to see around 2 months of data from a patient who's been involved in a trial to see whether there have been any impacts? Or is it possible that there could be effects that only appear after that 2-month period?
Pfizer has announced in their press release that they're following up all the patients for 2 years. So there will be an opportunity to see any later safety signals if they exist. I think it's fair to say that 2 months is probably the minimum safety period that you'd be comfortable with submitting. But remember, we're not in normal times. And this has been a very rapidly executed trial for which we should congratulate Pfizer and BioNTech. And so the regulators are also accelerating things, and they are basically asking for a minimal safety data set to ensure the safety of the vaccine and its efficacy.
Which leads me to my next question. What would you say to people who think, well, normally it takes years to bring a vaccine to market, and here we are talking about months? I'm a bit concerned about whether, if this vaccine is made available to me, I should have it or not. What would you say to that person?
Well, yeah, there have been concerns expressed about that. Let's face it, large sections of the scientific community have been engaged for the last year in really a scramble to get these vaccines developed and researched. But having said that, if you, for example, read the Pfizer protocol for this study, it is a very high quality protocol. It's randomized, it's controlled, it's done to all the usual industry standards. It's just that the regulators and the scientists involved have found ways under the duress of this pandemic to accelerate the whole process. For example, the regulators have played their part. They are turning around protocol submissions in days rather than the usual weeks. Ethics committees as well. So everybody has basically put their hand to the tiller to try and get these programs done quickly. And Pfizer are not the only company who've done very rapid trials. There's the Oxford AstraZeneca trial as well, which is nearing the first readout.
Just summarise for us, if you would, your take on what we know and don't know about what this vaccine might do, how it might work, and who it might work for.
Well, bear in mind, we're going off a press release at the moment, and so it's difficult to be absolutely certain about these things. There's lots of data that still needs to be seen and reviewed. But based on the press release and the data that's been shown by Pfizer, it clearly prevents COVID illness they're saying 90% of patients of the patients who develop COVID illness, amongst all the 45,000 who were in the trial, 94 developed COVID, and 90% of those were in the placebo group. So it prevents 90% of COVID illness. What they didn't look at was whether it prevented asymptomatic illness, and that gets to the transmission question. Having said that, if it prevents COVID illness, symptomatic COVID, it's fairly likely to also prevent asymptomatic COVID, although we don't know that for sure from this trial because they didn't look at it.
So in the immediate future, presumably based on what you're saying, you would very much see a vaccination program working alongside mass testing, test and trace, and so forth. And talk to us about the logistics of managing something like that.
Well, as you've heard from other contributors, including the Secretary of State for Health, this won't be an immediate rollout because we've got results today. This is going to take time. manufacturing is one of the most costly and burdensome parts of these programs, and all the major players have already set up the manufacturing facilities in anticipation, at risk. It's at risk because they put the money in before they knew what the results were. Now, the logistics of distribution, we are just in the middle of quite a large-scale flu vaccination program, and we've seen that the NHS is able to cope with that. There are a few additional challenges with this program if it's the Pfizer vaccine that we choose. Bear in mind, there are other vaccines coming through. It's going to be required to be given to a far larger number of patients than the flu vaccine. Secondly, it has significant transportation issues. It's been well reported that this vaccine needs to be transported at a very low temperature, much lower than your fridge freezer at home, and minus 80 degrees. That poses difficulties, probably more in developing countries than in Western countries. The Pfizer chief scientific officer was on air yesterday saying that they've got specialized containers in which they can transport this vaccine at minus 80 using dry ice. So I think those obstacles will be overcome. Then it will become a logistic exercise at the GP surgeries and in the distribution chain in the UK. But because of the pressing need that this pandemic has imposed on us and the great costs it's imposing on us, I think these obstacles will be overcome. I'm an optimist.
OK, really interesting to talk to you, Dr. Gillies O'Bryan-Tear from the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine. Thank you very much.